In their holy book, the Quran, Christ is regarded as only a prophet. Yeah, Allah had no son. That's what they say. That's in their holy book. If the Pope was his representative on earth, then he also must be a prophet of God. This caused the followers of Muhammad to fear and respect the Pope as another holy man. The Pope moved quickly and issued bulls granting the Arabian generals permission to invade and conquer nations of North Africa. The Vatican helped to finance the building of these massive Islamic armies in exchange for 3 favors. Just 3. Number 1, eliminate the Jews and Christians. The latter were regarded as true believers, which they called infidels. Number 2, protect the Augustinian monks and Roman Catholics. Makes sense. Number 3, conquer Jerusalem for his holiness in the Vatican. Well, that one didn't quite go over so well. that one didn't, and I believe the Lord allowed that to happen. See, I think God stopped that. I think the Lord stopped that from happening. I believe that. As time went by, the power of Islam became tremendous. Jews and true Christians were slaughtered, and Jerusalem fell into their hands. Roman Catholics were never attacked, nor were there shrines during this time. But when the Pope asked for Jerusalem, he was surprised at their denial. The Arabian generals had such military success that they could not be intimidated by the Pope. Nothing could stand by the way of their own plan. Under Warwick's direction, Muhammad wrote that Abraham offered Ishmael as a sacrifice. The Bible says that Isaac was the sacrifice, but Muhammad removed Isaac's name and inserted Ishmael's name. As a result of this, in Muhammad vision, the faithful Muslims built the mosque, the Dome of the Rock, in Ishmael's honor on the site of the Jewish temple that was destroyed in 70 AD. This made Jerusalem the second most holy place in the Islamic faith. How could they give such a sacred shrine to the Pope without causing a revolt? The Pope realized that they had created what he had created was out of control when he heard they were calling His Holiness an infidel. He didn't like that. Got a little mad about that. If he ever met me, I'd call him a lot more. The Muslim generals were determined to conquer the world for Allah, and now they turned toward Europe. Islamic ambassadors approached the Pope and asked for papal bulls to give them permission to invade European countries. The Vatican was outraged. War was inevitable. Temporal power and control of the world was considered the basic right of the Pope. He wouldn't think of sharing it with those whom he considered heathens. So that's the end of the Jesuit, the former Jesuit, Alberto Rivera, his testimony as to what he was told by a very high-level Jesuit priest in the Vatican. Okay. And Cardinal Bia Cardinal Bia is a very high-level Jesuit, or was a very high-level Jesuit. You can see it, in his doctorates and everything that he had there, and his training and everything. He knew what he was talking about, and he was specialized in biblical archaeology. Okay, so the guy knew what was going on. See, one thing you have to understand: the Vatican holds all the secrets. That's where the secrets of the arcane rest, right there. All the secrets of the mystery religions all rest there. They know it all. And I'm going to preach a sermon to you sometime in the future because I think we don't understand things. See, we have an open Bible, right? So we have all the truth here. We don't hide anything, right? God doesn't hide the truth from us here. He gives it to us and He reveals it all to us. But the devil's kingdom is the opposite of that. The devil's kingdom is compartmentalized. So if you're a Jesuit, you know what you're told in that compartment. If you're a witch, you know what you're told in that mystery religion. You know what you are told there, and that's all that. And you know everything, and you're not lying. At most of what you're saying, if you come out of it and you get saved, and they tell you what happened, they're not lying to you. That's what they know from the compartment that they've been locked in. The Masonic order, they're not lying to you for the most part. Those that come out and are saved and get born again, that's the compartment they're in. It's all they've been told. But what sits high on top, that mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots, they know all the secrets. The Black Pope understands all of it. He knows all of it too well. So he's not confused. Now I want to give you some external evidence here. All right. We're making good time here. I'll keep you here till 4 or 5. We'll be set. All right. Some external evidence. I'm just kidding. I know it's your first day here. She's like, really? We don't get to move for like 4 hours? I didn't sign up for this. External evidence. The crescent moon of Islam in Rome. To listen to this here. It is obvious that this symbol did not originate with Islam. The symbol of the crescent moon and star is extremely ancient and was present in every ancient pagan culture of the world. It is very powerful and important alchemy symbol relating to the third eye and the sixth chakra, as well as to the feminine aspect of the soul. Islam stole this and used it as a primary symbol. Along with the symbol, Islam also stole the ancient pagan lunar calendar of the area. This works directly with the feminine alchemical energies, which are manipulated to keep the ignorant followers enslaved. See, they follow alchemy. Alchemy, what's witchcraft? I mean, it's sorcery. It's more specifically, it's sorcery. Alchemy's goal is to create the man, the final, well, they're going to turn a golem into a man is what they're going to do, and they're going to breathe into it life. And I think what they're really showing you is how they're trying to get to is the Antichrist. They're trying to show you the rise of the Antichrist through alchemy, which, you know, I don't have time to go down that road. Anyway, but understand this. I want to see, and Brother Aaron's going to work with me here in the future, and I'm going to have some. I'm going to be able to hit a button on this, right, Brother Aaron? We're going to work this out to where I can hit a button on this, and we'll have one, Brother Paul. We're going to have one of them fancy slide. I'm telling you, we're going big time here, man. We're gonna pull this thing down and have some pictures up there for you. I'm just gonna touch the picture. It's gonna go boop. It's gonna be up there, and you'll be like, wow. Anyway, isn't that nice, Brother Aaron? Man, I'm telling you, I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, but you've seen the crescent moon, but you can see the crescent moon. In archaeology, you can see it all over the place. It's there. It's predates all the way back to Babylon. You can see it in Assyria. You can see it in the tablets anywhere. Just Google it. Just type in the crescent moon and see the symbol. You've got to understand they're giving you hints and clues to who they are by the symbols they use. But they don't call themselves Islam though. They didn't call Babylon. They don't have to. They're using the same method of communication. That is a method of communication that is telling you what they stand for. And you can find it. You can find it. Muhammad did not invent Islam. The Vatican did. The Vatican borrowed it from paganism, took it back, repackaged it, and sold it to a bunch of people out in the sand. Now another thing, when they take the cookie god out of the Pope's place, the Pope places that cookie god inside of a crescent moon. So, when you know that weird-looking thing he has that he holds up that, I don't know, it's probably some weird scepter or something. I don't know what it is. He's a weirdo. But anyway, he's got this cookie thing, and he says that this is the host, he calls it. That's not spooky enough. It's the host, and he says it's Jesus in there, right? And he's going to take Jesus, and he sets it into the female crescent. The male into the female. That's all the further I'm going with that, but do you understand? What are they picturing? They're picturing the same thing, the sons of God and the daughters of men. They're picturing the same thing. It's the same religion. Islam did not invent that crescent moon. That crescent moon came from Rome. They were using it. They got it from Mystery Babylon. They use the same symbol. And Islamic people are so deceived, they try to say, just like Roman Catholics, well, we don't bow down to these things, or we don't follow any images, or we don't. Yes, you do. You follow images. You follow a crescent moon that you got from Rome, and you don't even know it. The sun and the moon, this represents the generative principle. By the way, did you know the God of the lodge is Allah? And they have the moon and the stars. I'm going to see if I can find a picture of that for you here real quick. But they have the moon and the stars. The God of the lodge is Islam over there. And they use the same thing. They use the same thing as Islam does. I want you to see this here. I want to show you this. Now this is a lodge. You see the crescent moon here? You see that? Or you see the pyramids? You see the crescent moon? You see who these people are? Okay, look at this. See that? Okay. Now this is a Mason lodge, a Shriners Lodge. This is a Freemason lodge meeting in Cairo in Egypt in 1940 under the portrait of King Farouk the First. He was the king of Egypt from 1936 to 1952. President Abdul Nasser 1954 to 1970. Mohammed Anwar Sadat 1970 to 1981 were also members of this lodge. This is the ancient Egyptian order and Arab noble of the mystic shrine. These are Masons. Okay, and I'll show you these pictures later if you want to see them. But these are Masons, okay? Wait a minute. Muslims that are Shriners? Whoops. Muslims that are Shriners? How does that work? I thought they couldn't follow any symbols or signs, Brother Paul. I thought they didn't do any of that stuff. I thought that wasn't what they were about. I thought they didn't go for any of that idolatry stuff. Listen, folks, it's the same mystery religion. It's the same thing. It was started by Babylon. It was started by Rome. It's the same thing. That's the God of the Lodge. How about this, the Star of Islam? You ever seen that before? That's another symbol. I thought they didn't have any stars or I thought they didn't have any images or anything like that. They didn't do any of that stuff. Here you go. This is the 8-pointed star of Islam. It's called the Star of Islam. See that? It's crazy, isn't it? He's looking at me like, what is that? All right, that's the Star of Islam. Why 8 points? Well, symbols mean something. They do. They mean something. You believe that, don't you? As much as you've seen of things that we've studied and talked about, let me tell you what that 8-pointed star is. That 8-pointed star is a pagan symbol that was associated with the great power throughout the ancient world. It was the symbol of the goddess Ashtaroth. Huh. The symbol of the goddess Ashtaroth. And also the symbol of Venus. It represents the heart chakra. Something other than pure Islamic Muhammad and Allah, wouldn't that be something different? I don't know. How about this one? I got another one for you. How about the all-seeing eye in Islam? Now, surely that wouldn't be in there, would it? Surely the all-seeing eye would not be in Islam. Well, I'm going to show you a picture of the all-seeing eye in Islam. Give me a second here. Let me find it. I know it's here somewhere. Here it is. This right here is the all-seeing eye in Islam. Okay? This is the all. You see it from there? Can you see it? It's called the Hamza, actually. What in the world does that mean? Well, I'm going to tell you what it means here. That Hamza, I think I'm pronouncing it right anyway. Yeah, I am. Also Romanized the Hamza, meaning 5, is a palm-shaped amulet popular throughout the Middle East and North Africa and commonly used in jewelry and wall hangings, depicting the open right hand, an image recognized and used as a sign of protection in many societies throughout history. The Hamza is believed to provide defense against the evil eye. The symbol predates Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. In Islam, it is also known as the Hand of Fatima. Remember that name, Fatima? So named to commemorate Muhammad's daughter, Fatima. The Levantine Christians call it the Hand of Mary. They're not really Christians, by the way. For the Virgin Mary, Jews refer to it as the Hand of Miriam, in remembrance of biblical Miriam, sister of Moses. And Islam, the Hamza is called the Hand of Fatima in honor of one of the daughters of the Prophet Muhammad. Some say in an Islamic tradition, the 5 fingers represent the 5 pillars of Islam. In Old Turkish, this sign is called with pence, meaning Hand of 5. The household of the Islamic Prophet Muhammad. This relates to the belief that God exists in everything, they say. That's why they have that hand with the all-seeing eye in it. It's 5 fingers. They have it held up there, and they have the eye in the middle. This relates to the belief that God exists in everything. Another meaning of the symbol relates to the sky god Horus. Oh. It refers to the eye of Horus, which means man cannot escape from the eye of conscience. It says that the sun and the moon are the eyes of Horus. hand of Fatima also represents femininity. It is referred to as the woman's holy hand. It is to believe they have extraordinary characteristics that use to protect people from evil and other dangers. Now, why would Islam have the same mystery, Babylon the Great, eye? Why would they have that symbol? The daughter of Muhammad. Why would they have that symbol? You know, the Bible talks about that idol shepherd, though, that guy that's watching. It says in Zechariah 11:17, "Woe to the idol shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened." It's only got one eye. The left eye. You see, these are external signs that Islam is nothing more than a mystery religion. It's nothing more than Babylon. It's nothing more than created. Because why would you use these symbols that are not biblical? I mean, they're not right. They're not godly. Why would they use those symbols? Muhammad had nothing to do with any of those things. Why would they have those? I mean, where did Muhammad get those things from? Where did he get that from, the all-seeing eye? Where would Muhammad get that from? Where did he get the crescent moon from? Where did he get those external signs from? Why does he believe in the immaculate? Why do Muslims believe in the Immaculate Conception? Why do they believe that? Strange. I'm going to prove to you they do by Muhammad's own words. Father, thank you, Lord, for this. Thank you for your words. Thank you for the truth, Lord. Lord, we just pray that maybe some Muslims will hear this and come out of that and be saved. Maybe some Christians will get educated enough to understand the history of Islam and be able to use that to reach others for Christ. We pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Muhammad was born into a culture where moon god worship was dominant. Furthermore, he was born into the Quraysh tribe, who were particularly devoted to the moon god. According to numerous inscriptions, the title of this moon god was Al-Ilah, which means the deity or the god, meaning that he was the chief or high god amongst many gods. Al-Ilah, the god, was shortened to Allah in pre-Islamic times. Now this part may be slightly confusing. Until now we have seen that in the Babylonian system, the sun is always presented as a male god and the moon presented as a female goddess, and yet here we find talk of a male moon god, not a moon goddess. This is because there were certain branches where the roles were reversed. The male divinity became the moon and the female divinity became the sun. This form of the mysteries was particularly prevalent in Arabia and amongst the Saxons and Norsemen of Europe. This role reversal remained widespread around Arabia in particular, long after its popularity had waned elsewhere. Echoes of this lesser-known form still exist today. For example, Cush, Nimrod's father, was worshipped as a god under the title Meni or Manai, which means the numberer. He is accredited under the Babylonian system with inventing arithmetic. Now such has been the influence of the Saxons and Norsemen in particular on Scotland, that we have a New Year festival that still exists today called Hogmanay, and this comes from Hogmanay, which means the feast of the numberer, who numbers the years. Another small example of how Babylon permeates our culture. Muhammad's father and uncle both had the name Allah incorporated into their own names. His father was called Abdallah, and his uncle was called Obidallah. This echoes the Babylonian practice of incorporating your god into your own name and illustrates the preeminence of the moon god cult in his time. This fact answers the questions: why is Allah never defined in the Quran? Why did Muhammad assume that the pagan Arabs already knew who Allah was? The answer is because they already did know who Allah was. He was their moon god. Muhammad wasn't attempting to introduce the concept of a new god in the Quran. He was merely building on the one that already existed in the area. All Muhammad did was go one step further than his fellow pagan Arabs. While they believed that Allah, the moon god, was the greatest of all gods in a whole pantheon of gods, Muhammad said that Allah was not just the greatest god amongst many, but that he was in fact the only god. In effect, he said, look, you already believe that the moon god Allah is the greatest of all gods. All I want you to do is accept the idea that he is the only God. I'm not taking away the Allah you already worship. I'm only taking away his wife and his daughters and all the other gods. Here is a picture of an Allah idol recovered in Arabia. Note the crescent moon on his chest. The pagan Arabs never accused Muhammad of preaching a different Allah to the one they already worshipped, and archaeological evidence proves that he was one and the same. The Encyclopedia of Religion says, Allah is a pre-Islamic name corresponding to the Babylonian Bel. Allah is nothing more than Baal again with a new name. Muhammad attempted to have it both ways though. To pagans he said that he still believed in the moon god Allah, but to the Jews and the Christians he said that Allah was their God too. In effect, it was the same technique that Catholic bishops had used to merge Christianity with paganism. Many Christians today have swallowed the lie that Allah is the same as the Christian God, when he is in fact Baal. Fortunately, Jews and Christians of that time recognized Muhammad's deceptive ideas and rejected Allah as a false god. Of course this angered Satan no end, and by consequence it angered his puppet Muhammad no end, and we know that when plan A, manipulation and flattery, fails with Satan, he quickly resorts to plan B, intimidation and persecution. We perhaps never see this more clearly than in the relationship Muhammad had with the Jews. The Quran has a distinct split personality that correlate to two periods in Muhammad's life. At the start of his life in Mecca, he was relatively obscure and had no particular type of influence. He was in a position of weakness. In the second part of his life he moved to Medina as a wealthy and powerful warlord. There he was in a position of power. So all the earlier writings from his time in Mecca are generally peaceful. This was the period when Muhammad was in a position of weakness and trying to convince the local Jews that he was a prophet of their God, the Plan A years. All the later writings from his time in Medina, after he had risen to a position of wealth and power, are full of hate and anger towards the Jews who had rejected him. These are the Plan B years. He started calling for their slaughter and waged war against them, along with anyone else who rejected him or his message. Now it's important to understand that in Islam there is a principle of abrogation. This simply means that wherever there is a contradiction between verses and the Quran contradicts itself a fair amount, the later one cancels out the earlier one. So since the violent, warring verses are the later ones from his time in Medina, they cancel out the earlier, peaceful ones from his time in Mecca. This has been a great tool of deception for Muslims, as whenever they are challenged about the violent fruits of their religion, they point to the peaceful Mecca verses. In ignorance, the average person takes them at their word, completely unaware that those verses are effectively null and void under the principle of abrogation. They have been replaced by later commands to slaughter all non-believers and conquer the world. It is Muhammad's words and actions from the Medina years that fuel Islam's never-ending hatred towards the Jews and the problems in the Middle East. It is the words and actions of Muhammad in the Medina years that encourages and condones all forms of terrorism, lying, deceit, violence, murder of non-believers, oppression and domination as a service to Allah. Islamic terrorists are not acting contrary to the example of Muhammad their prophet. They are acting in perfect harmony with his own actions 1400 years ago. The Bible says that, "You shall know a tree by the fruit it bears." The entire history of Islam has been littered with this type of violence, and when we look at the life of Muhammad in any detail, we will discover why. It produces bad fruit because it was a bad tree with its roots in the kingdom of darkness. The following are the recorded words and deeds of Muhammad. In the following example, we see Muhammad suddenly and conveniently receive a message from Allah to rape captured women. This event shows a particular audacity, permitting rape at the drop of a hat simply by conjuring a verse from Allah to support it out of thin air. Any whim or fancy that took him could be acted upon if he claimed he was doing it under divine authority or instruction. Muhammad understood what Nimrod and Semiramis understood, that spiritual authority gives temporal authority. Wherever Satan is involved, there is often a telltale hatred for the Jews, and this comes through loud and clear in Islam. Here, the unbelieving brother was seemingly impressed with Islam's ability to influence people to kill Jews and family members. This practice continues to this day in the Muslim community. Parents will kill children and brothers will kill siblings who leave Islam and call it a mercy killing. The brother in this instant converted on the spot, although we can't be sure he didn't do it out of self-preservation. Islam has a long history of forced conversions where the alternative is death. Muslims have been taught that their redemption will not come until all Jews have been destroyed, and therefore they will not stop fighting against them until they have reached this end. The prophet Ezekiel reports a time when Arab nations will team up with Russia to attempt to wipe out Israel. They will be driven to do this partly because of this prophecy. If the Jews are not wiped out, according to Islam, their false Messiah can't come. Do not be misled by claims of Muslims that their gripe with Israel is about land. Satan wants the Jews destroyed, as he has done from the beginning of time. He has hardwired this desire into the core of Islam through Muhammad, and they will work towards that end, no matter how much land Israel gives them. Muslims believe that they must kill all Jews, or their religion has been proved to be false. It's that simple. The United Nations are attempting to create a two-state solution where Jews and Palestinians share the land, but we know from our studies of the character of the satanic Jezebel spirit that it will not be content to share control of anything. It will have no equals. The goal of Islam is to extend its influence until it rules the entire world. In Islam, the world is currently divided into two, the House of Islam and the House of the Unbeliever or Infidel. They foresee a day when the whole earth will become Islamic and work continuously towards this end. The name Islam actually means submission, and this refers to the whole world submitting to the rule of the pagan moon god Allah, Allah being another name for Baal, and Baal being Satan. They believe that world peace will only come when they have triumphed over all the so-called infidel.
Hello America. We've been examining some of the claims made by ABC News on their 2020 special, Islam Questions and Answers. We've seen that ABC was wrong when they suggested that radical Muslims are our first line of defense against terrorism. They were wrong when they said that the Quran teaches that Muslims will get raisins, not virgins, in paradise. They were wrong when they told us that Adam and Eve were created equally from dust, according to Islam. And they were wrong when they said that men and women have equal rights and responsibilities in Islam. Fortunately, we're now turning to an issue that even ABC News can't get wrong: Muhammad's intolerance towards non-Muslims. ABC messed everything else up, but let's face it, a drugged monkey could figure this one out. So I guess I'll just sit back and drink a cup of tea while ABC World News anchor Diane Sawyer does what she does best and uses her journalistic expertise to expose Muhammad's clear commands to oppress and subjugate unbelievers. Let him have it, Diane.
And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion.
What in the lowest pit of Hades did you just say?
And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion. Our differences are God's mercy.
Our differences are God's mercy? You're telling us that Muhammad said these words. I wonder if the clip will make more sense if I play it backwards.
Is terms not process nerfitra. There's no that give up never last you bought to shoot it. That's the Muhammad.
As you can see, I'm totally flabbergasted. Diane Sawyer made two distinct claims. First, Muhammad promoted tolerance towards people of different religions. Second, Muhammad said that our religious differences are a mercy from God. So, ABC News is telling us that Islam is tolerant. We could just take ABC's word for it, but let's do something crazy. Let's make sure our views actually correspond to reality. Did Muhammad promote tolerance towards unbelievers? I guess this would be a good time to ask a few obvious questions. For instance, when Muhammad started preaching Islam, how many pagans were in Mecca? A lot. How many pagans were in Mecca when Muhammad died 2 decades later? None. So what happened? Did Muhammad's religious tolerance eradicate paganism from Mecca? When Muhammad conquered Mecca, the Kaaba was surrounded by hundreds of idols that were very dear to the people of Arabia. What happened to all of those idols? They were smashed to pieces by the ever-so-tolerant Prophet of Islam. How many Jews were in Medina when Muhammad moved there? 3 large tribes. How many Jews were in Medina after 8 years of Muhammad's leadership? 0 tribes. Interesting, Muhammad's religious tolerance has a way of obliterating all other religions.
And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion. Our differences are God's mercy.
Here's a little known fact. According to Muslim sources, the pagans, the idol-worshipping polytheists of Mecca, were far more tolerant than the Muslims. Consider this passage from At-Tabari's history, which refers to Muhammad's early preaching in Mecca. The messenger of God proclaimed God's message openly and declared Islam publicly to his tribesmen. When he did so, they did not withdraw from him or reject him in any way, as far as I have heard, until he spoke of their gods and denounced them. Notice that the Meccans had no objections to Muhammad peacefully preaching Islam. It was only after the tolerant of all religions Muhammad started viciously attacking the beliefs of the Meccans that disputes began to arise. A few pages later in At-Tabari, we find that Muhammad was harassing the Meccans by mocking their gods and their values. One day the Meccans were discussing Muhammad and they said, "We have never seen the like of what we have endured from this man. He has derided our traditional values, abused our forefathers, reviled our religion, caused division among us, and insulted our gods. We have endured a great deal from him." As they continued talking about Muhammad, he came up and said, "Hear, men of Quraysh, by him in whose hand Muhammad's soul rests, I have brought you slaughter." Sounds like a threat. Muslims often complain about the intolerance of the pagans in Mecca, but don't ever forget that Muhammad preached in Mecca for more than a decade, and he made it out alive, after years of criticizing the religious beliefs of the people there, and even after threatening to slaughter them. Would I survive for 10 years in Mecca today if I stood in the streets and mocked the religious beliefs of the people who live there? Would I last 10 days? 10 minutes? We'll never know because, thanks to Muhammad's teachings, non-Muslims aren't even allowed in the city.
And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion. And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion. And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion. And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion.
So the pagans were far more tolerant of Muhammad and his followers. But that's the pagans. Islam has a higher view of Christians and Jews. We have to keep in mind, however, that according to Islam, there's a world of difference between Muslims on the one hand and Christians and Jews on the other. While Muslims are the greatest people in the world, Christians and Jews are the worst of creatures. The Quran declares in Surah 3, verse 110, "Ye are the best of peoples, Muslims are the best of peoples, evolved for mankind, enjoining what is right, forbidding what is wrong, and believing in God." Who are the best people in the world? Muslims. And in Surah 98:6 we read, "Verily, those who disbelieve in the religion of Islam, the Quran, and Prophet Muhammad, from among the people of the Scripture, Jews and Christians, and al-mushrikun will abide in the fire of hell. They are the worst of creatures." Now, if we're the worst of creatures, and Muslims are the best people in the world, Don't you think this might put an obstacle in the way of Muslims seeking genuine friendships with non-Muslims? Especially when the Quran says things like, "O you who believe, do not take the Jews and the Christians for friends, they are friends of each other. And whoever amongst you takes them for a friend, then surely he is one of them." But it gets worse. Christians and Jews are so bad, Muslims are actually commanded to fight us simply because of our beliefs. Surah 9:21 commands Muslims to fight those who believe not in Allah. What's that? Fight those who attack you first? No. Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from among the people of the book, that's Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Muslims are commanded to fight us because of our beliefs until we pay them off. If that's not clear enough, we can always turn to Muhammad's words in Sahih Muslim. The Messenger of Allah said, "I've been commanded to fight against people till they testify that there is no God but Allah, that Muhammad is the Messenger of Allah, and they establish prayer and pay zakat." What's that, Muhammad? You've been commanded to fight people only in self-defense? No, you've been commanded to fight people until they become Muslims. And this is exactly what we find in the Quran. "O Prophet, strive hard against the unbelievers and the hypocrites, and be unyielding to them, and their abode is hell, and evil is the destination. O you who believe, fight those of the unbelievers who are near to you, and let them find in you hardness. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those who are with him are severe against disbelievers, and merciful among themselves. Surely Allah has bought of the believers their persons and their property for this, that they shall have the garden." Well, since Allah has done all this for Muslims, what are they supposed to do in return? They fight in Allah's way, so they slay and are slain.
And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion.
So Muhammad harassed the pagans for years. He derided their values, abused their forefathers, reviled their religion, caused division among them, and insulted their gods. That's what he did when he didn't have an army. When he was strong enough, Muhammad conquered Mecca, took over their temples, smashed their idols, and eventually issued the command to slay them wherever you find them. As for Christians and Jews, they're the worst of creatures, while Muslims are the best of peoples. Muslims can't be friends with Jews and Christians. Muslims are commanded to fight and subjugate Jews and Christians because of our beliefs. And Muslims are merciful among themselves, but severe against who? Unbelievers.
And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion.
But don't forget that Diane Sawyer did give us a piece of evidence to show that Muhammad preached tolerance. I've given you numerous quotations directly from the Quran and other trusted Muslim sources. What does Diane give us?
Our differences are God's mercy. Our differences are God's mercy. Our differences are God's mercy.
According to Diane Sawyer, we know that Muhammad preached tolerance towards all religions because he said that our differences are God's mercy. With this, ABC News may get the 2010 Golden Medallion for mind-bogglingly ridiculous scripture twisting. What did Muhammad actually say? I should probably point out that according to most Muslims, we don't know, since the various versions of the quotation are classified as da'if, weak hadith that can't be trusted. Most Muslims reject weak hadith. Some scholars even say that the quotation doesn't go back to Muhammad at all. It goes back to a later Muslim. But I'm not crazy about the Muslim methodology, so let's grant ABC News their weak hadith. What does it actually say? Does it command Muslims to be tolerant towards everyone because different religious beliefs are God's mercy? No, it says, "The difference of opinions of my companions is a mercy for my ummah." The ummah is the community of Muslims. Is there anything in this quotation about being tolerant towards other religions? Absolutely not. In fact, Muslim commentators are quite clear that this narration isn't even about Muslim doctrine, which they believe is set in stone. Instead, it has to do with certain differences of opinion concerning minor Muslim practices, the sorts of differences you'll find among the 4 schools of Islamic jurisprudence in Sunni Islam. The idea, according to Muslim scholars, is that if there were no differences of opinion among Muhammad's companions, any little mistake a Muslim made would classify him as an unbeliever. Therefore, it's good that there are differences of opinion when it comes to the little things. You can do some different things and not worry about accidentally apostatizing and having your head chopped off. That's why these differences are a mercy from Allah. But what does Diane Sawyer do with the passage? She doesn't give us the actual quotation, so we can't see what Muhammad really said. She doesn't give us the reference, so we can't even look it up. She totally twists the meaning from differences of opinion among Muhammad's companions are okay to differences among religions are okay. And she completely ignores all of the clear passages where Muhammad commands his followers to fight, subjugate, and even kill non-Muslims simply because they're non-Muslims. This is how ABC News convinces Western viewers that Muhammad was tolerant and peaceful.
And Muhammad said that we should all be tolerant of each other's religion. Our differences are God's mercy.
Now, given what we've seen in our past several videos, I have to ask ABC an important question. If you can only defend this religion by twisting the facts and inventing things and ignoring everything that even remotely resembles careful scholarship, if you can only make Islam seem compatible with Western values by misrepresentation and distortion and outright deception, doesn't this tell us something about Islam? If Islam really were the force of freedom and equality and tolerance that ABC News wants us to believe it is, wouldn't Diane Sawyer be able to open the Quran and the Hadith and prove her claims by accurately presenting us with the teachings of Islam? Shame on you, ABC. You've insulted your viewers, you've insulted our intelligence, and you've insulted centuries of victims of Muslim intolerance. Instead of drawing attention to the source of violence and oppression, you cover it up. You even praise it. And I'd say this makes you partially responsible for the blood of future victims of Islamic terror. We've been putting up with this for far too long, and I think I speak for millions of Americans when I say, enough already.
But even if we, or an angel from heaven, should preach a gospel other than the one we preach to you, let them be under God's curse. As we have already said, so now I say again, if anybody is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted, let them be under God's curse.
Muhammad preached a different gospel that we already have in the Holy Bible. Islam is anti-Christ, and under God's curse. God wants them to accept His only Son Lord Jesus, for salvation. Jesus' life, death, and resurrection. The Bible records how Jesus fulfilled prophecy when He was born to the Virgin Mary. He grew up unique from any other human because He never sinned. Crowds flocked to hear His teaching, and marvel at His miracles. Jesus healed the sick, raised the dead, and walked on water. Of all people, Jesus did not deserve to die. Yet, Jesus prophesied that He would be crucified and raised from the dead. His words came to pass. Soldiers beat Jesus and put a crown of thorns on His head. People mocked and spit on Him. Nails pierced His hands and feet into a wooden cross. Jesus had the power to save Himself, but He gave Himself, willingly dying on the cross. 3 days later, Jesus rose from the grave. Why the cross? As a Muslim, you may ask, why would Allah allow His prophetess to be mistreated and killed? Jesus' death was essential because every person is a sinner. For all have sinned, and fall short of the glory of God. Romans 3:23. Whether dishonoring parents, telling a lie, failing to love God best, or disbelieving God's word, we each have sinned against the holy God. The punishment for sin is death. For the wages of sin is death, Romans 6:23. God pours out his wrath against unbelieving sinners by separating them forever in hell. As the just judge, God will not overlook sin. We cannot save ourselves by good works, and we cannot buy our way into heaven. For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. This is a key difference between Christianity and Islam. Islam teaches that a person can earn paradise by keeping the 5 pillars. Even if possible to outweigh bad deeds with good deeds, the Bible teaches that all our righteous acts are like filthy rags. Even one single sin makes a person guilty of breaking all God's law. Sinful humans can do nothing to merit heaven. God sacrificed his Son for sinners. Jesus said,
For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.
God knew mankind's sin kept them from heaven. God knew the only way the sin debt could be paid was by a perfect one paying the price of death. God knew he alone could pay such an infinite price. So God's eternal plan was to send his Son Jesus to die in the believing sinner's place. As a Muslim, you may say, "Oh, I believe in Jesus. I believe Isa was a true teacher, a great prophet, and a good man." But you cannot say, Jesus was a true teacher, and yet deny his teaching, that he is the only way, truth, and life. You cannot believe Jesus was a great prophet, and yet reject his prophecy, that he would die, and rise again in 3 days. You cannot admit Jesus is a good man, yet disbelieve his claim to be the Son of God.
Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to another show of this wonderful series that we've been doing with Dr. J. Smith. Many of you know who he is. He's been at the Speaker's Corner for almost 25 years. He is a debater. He's an Islamic apologist and a polemist. And he represents also a amazing center called the Founder Center for Apologetics, and also he represents another interesting and amazing also ministry called I Square, among many other things, of course. And we congratulate you, by the way, on your PhD. And we're excited that Dr. J. Smith has been with us here in studio for a few days now, and we've been doing a lot of these series on the topics that are extremely problematic, extremely provocative, topics that I think a lot of people need to know about, but not just any people. Our Muslim friends need to be fully aware of them. And as a former Muslim myself, who grew up, born, raised in Saudi, and used to think one way about Islam and its history and its book and its man, I find it fascinating, of course, now that we are discussing new discoveries that contradicts a lot, if not all, of the traditional views within the Islamic scholarship. And that's what we're doing, myself and Dr. J. Smith. Today, we are going to take another look and take basically a different angle in relationship to those traditional views. And we will start by talking about the traditional dating as it relates to the start of Islam, the rise of Islam, the history of the Prophet of Islam, and from there, we'll venture into a whole lot of interesting topics, I'm sure. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for joining me here.
Well, it's good to be here, and Al, exactly what you have been saying. Remember the earlier episodes, we said that Islam really is dependent on 2 pillars, you might say, that hold it up. And those pillars are one book modeled by one man. The Book of the Man, the Book of the Man. We've said this many times. We've been bringing it up in our own discussions. It all comes back to one book modeled by one man. And now the former, earlier episodes, I think we did about 9 of them, they were all zeroed in on the book, the Quran itself. Now we're moving to the man himself. We're now going into the next pillar. And we're looking from a historical standpoint, what does history tell us? And this is why it will be damaging. And we're warning Muslims right up front. This is not going to be easy to listen to. We we do not apologize for this. This has already been done against our book and our man. For 150 years, we've had these same questions. Redacted criticism, source criticism, historical criticism, literary criticism, all these criticisms were created confronting the Bible and the person of Jesus Christ.
Correct.
And we've answered every one of those criticisms. That's why we understand this material better than probably anybody else, because we've had to work through it enough, especially the last 100 years. We've had to work through it. Now we're taking that edifice, all those criticisms, and bringing them over to Islam and asking the same questions that have been asked of our Bible, we asked of the Quran. We did that in the previous episodes. The same questions that were asked of Jesus Christ and how Christianity began, we are now moving to the person of Muhammad and Islam and Mecca and these areas. How did Islam really begin? And these are the questions we're going to do in these episodes. Now, to do that, we need to look and see what they say. And the Muslims are very clear that they have what they call the classical account.
That's correct.
Let's look at the screen, and you can see the dates that are there. So let's start with these dates. This is what you hear in every school, in every, well, I don't know of any other college or university in the world that has any other story but this story that we're going to show here. That the story is, the narrative is, Muhammad was born in 570.
Correct.
Okay? No one's ever doubted that. That he was born in a place called Mecca. No one's ever doubted that. That in 610 he was in a cave, and angel Jibril, as we know Gabriel in the Bible, came down, and as we said in the previous episode, said, Akra, read. And his response was, Ma Akra, I cannot read. Squeeze 3 times, and he goes back to Khadija, his wife, and she does a little test, have him sit on either knee, then disrobe and ask him, was this really an angel? And that proved that this was something authentic. And then she goes and has him talk to her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal, who is a Nestorian Christian. One of the ironies is a Nestorian Christian gives him and says, truly, you are a prophet. So it's a Nestorian Christian, according to the Islamic traditions, this narrative that really give Muhammad his authority. That was all in 610. So from 610 to roughly 622, there you can see on the slide, he then receives these Meccan revelations. And by that we mean the second half of the Quran.
That's right, and it's very distinguishable, of course, in style and format and everything else.
And how is it distinguishable?
I mean, it's known to be short, poetic rhymes. A lot of young Muslim kids, usually start there and by memorizing.
And most of the Meccan material we can accept. There's not too much that we would have a problem with.
That's right.
God is up here, man is down here.
Correct.
God does not enter time and space. There's nothing between God and man. So he needs these intermediaries called these Rasuls, these Nabis, and many of the stories there are about biblical characters. They're not the same stories you and I have, and they do not equate with the Bible as we talked yesterday.
That's correct.
But that Meccan material is the easy material. That's the acceptable material.
Correct.
Then he moves in 620, before that, in 621, as you can see in the narrative, he is woken up in the middle of the night, told to get on the back of a winged horse called the Burak, and he flies from Mecca up to Medina and then goes up to the seven heavens.
To Jerusalem, you mean?
Miraj, yeah. Sorry, did I say, I'm sorry, Jerusalem, and that's where the Dome of the Rock supposedly is situated, where that happens, where he then goes up. We're going to come back to the Dome of the Rock, hugely significant later on in these episodes. But that's where called the Miraj. How do you pronounce it?
Yes, Mi'raj.
Mi'raj. So I'll let you do the pronunciation so I don't desecrate it and make a fool of myself. That happens in 621. And then the next year, he then goes from Mecca up to Medina, and that's called the Hijrah. That's the Exodus from Mecca to Medina. And that's the beginning of the Medinan revelations, the first half of the Quran. Rule of thumb, first half, because there is some Meccan material in the Medinan chapters. There is some Medina material in the Meccan chapter. But rule of thumb, those really, if you take the Quran and just split it in half, here's the Quran right here, and you just put your thumb, this part, which is the first half, would be Medinan, this part would be Meccan. It goes backwards. So just turn the Quran upside down and you get the right sequence.
Yeah, and technically speaking, it's not organized really in such a manner, just to clarify for our audience.
So how is it organized?
It's organized by chapter size mainly.
Largest to smallest.
Exactly.
It's just that he was not very long-winded at the very beginning of his ministry. He became very long-winded at the end of his ministry. Right. I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek. Please don't take that literally. That's the sequence that we're assuming that this narrative is correct.
Correct.
We're going to destroy everything I've just said in a few hours. But let's continue on with that classical narrative. So if you look at the screen there, from 622 to 632, the last 10 years of his life, then the Medinan revelations are given. In 630, he then comes back down to Mecca and takes over without firing a shot. No war. He did it peacefully. And then in 632, suddenly he dies, which tends to happen with most of us. Can't choose when you're going to die. Some believe maybe he was poisoned. We don't know. But that's what the traditions say. Abu Bakr takes over for the next 2 years. He dies peacefully. Umar then takes over from him, and he goes from 634 to 644. The next 10 years, he is killed. Uthman then takes over from 644 to 656. He is killed. It's, as we said in our previous episodes, that's when the Quran was finally written down. And then Ali, the adopted son of Muhammad, should have been the rightful heir according to the Shiites. He then rules for 5 years in 656 to 661, and then he is killed.
That's right.
That is the narrative. That's the only story I've ever heard. Is that the only story you grew up with?
That's the story you've heard. And of course, when you get into the Shia version of events, they will tell you Ali would have been the righteous caliph to start with because he's the cousin of Muhammad. He's almost like the brother of Muhammad. He's the father of Muhammad's only surviving, at least at that time, grandchildren and so on and so forth. But this is the traditional Sunni.
Now, explain what you've just said. Muhammad had no heirs, did he?
He did not.
He had 4 daughters.
And
he did have 2 sons.
And they supposedly died mysteriously.
They died when they were too young. They were still children. So he had no male heirs. What is one of the odd things, if he had 12 wives, why is it he could not produce 2 sons? I leave that for the Muslims to answer, but that's a question I've asked many Muslims. He's not much of a model as far as if you want to ask for his fidelity. Not fidelity, but certainly that's a whole other question. But certainly he was able to produce 2 sons. That's ironic in and of itself. But what we do know is Ali was the one that, according to the Shiites, should have been the rightful heir. Correct. Because he was part of the family.
Correct.
Now, do you know any other story? Now, I'm not giving you everything. This is just the skeleton. Do you know any other story besides this?
I mean, this is pretty much what every Muslim needs to know about. Of course, you learn later that there was a biography about Muhammad, Sirat Rasulullah.
Okay, now before you get into that, let's just look at this graph again. Yeah. This everything you see in red, in that dotted red line, is what we're talking about. Those are the dates. With the birth of Muhammad 570 and the death 632. That's in that rectangular red dotted line.
Correct.
Now, let me ask you, we're talking about the 7th century. Certainly, that story, that narrative of Muhammad's life, what he did, how it happened, how Islam really began, how the Quran was finally tabulated, all that should have been written down by someone who was there, right?
That's right. At least you would expect someone who was fascinated by the whole thing would have wrote it down.
And there was no reason why they didn't know how to read and write at that time, correct?
We know of people like Ibn Mas'ud and Ubay who wrote down even Revelations.
Okay, it mentioned that they wrote it down. Now, was this story, that everything I've just told you, was it written in that red dotted area?
No, it was written later.
Oh, so let's look and see. Let's go up the slide again. This is not when it was written in the red area. It was written here. It was first written down by, the story of Muhammad's life was first written down by a man named Ibn Hisham. Hold on a minute.
Ibn Ishaq.
Okay, be careful. Ibn Ishaq is what is attributed. That's what Muslims claim.
Correct.
See, his name is there. Look, and you can see, we put it up there. Look at the date, 765, Ibn Ishaq. You notice I didn't put the red line around his name. Why haven't I done that?
Because his material, at least most of it, is lost.
Well, none of it exists. We don't have any documents today from Ibn Ishaq. The first documents we have are from Ibn Hisham. Look at the date, 833. Ibn Hisham takes what was given to him by his own teacher, who was a student of Ibn Ishaq.
That's right.
And throws out what he doesn't like, and only retains what he does like, and then writes it down in and so that is the first tabulated biography that is extant today.
And the interesting thing is he introduces also for the first time the genealogy of Muhammad in there.
Interestingly, and this is in 833.
That's correct.
Now, let's do your math. 632 is when Muhammad died. 833 is when Ibn Hisham died. How many years have we got
201 years.
200 years. It takes them 200 years to write down the first biography of Muhammad.
And one of the most basic requirements for a biography is eyewitness accounts.
Absolutely. Now, Even more than that, most Muslims don't go to the Sirah. That's the biography. They go to the Hadith. So when was the first compilation extant that exists today of the Hadith of Muhammad?
240 years.
There it is right there on the graph. Let's look at the graph again. There it is. 870 is when Al-Bukhari dies. He's the first to tabulate it in one form. He was given 600,000 of these akhbars, and he whittles them down, throws out all of them except for about 7,400,
With
basically,
some
397. That's 80, so 98% he throws out and only retains 2%. Throws out the vast majority, retains only 2%, and that's the 9 volumes that we have today.
Correct.
We're thinking that's the 9. It's attributed to him because even the earliest document we have for Al-Bukhari is not to the 11th century, and that's only 1 volume. You have to go to the 17th century to get all 9 together.
That's correct.
This is, you can see where there's an awful lot yet to do research on Al-Bukhari and whether or not he's even authoritative.
Exactly, because the fundamental question is, do we have even an original manuscript for Al-Bukhari?
No, we don't. Not until the 11th century, and he was there in the 9th century. So it takes another 200 years before we even get a manuscript that we can even attribute to him, and that's only 1 volume of 9. So there you're talking about 240 years after the Prophet. When you get to the tafsir and the tahriq, which would be the commentaries that explain the Quran, and the tahriq, which would be the history of all of mankind up until the time of Muhammad, they are introduced by a man named Al-Tabari. Look on the graph again. You'll see when he died, 923. So that's the 10th century. So everything we know about Muhammad, everything, you can see it on this graph there, everything we know about who Muhammad was, what he did, comes from Ibn Ishaq, 765. We don't have his material, so we have to go to Ibn Hisham, 833, Al-Bukhari, 870, Al-Tabari, 923, and later.
And I want to just make a comment right here. I'm going to ask my Muslim friends who are watching this, doesn't this prove to you that Islam is a man-made all the way? All the way.
Hundreds of years later.
Exactly. I mean, what else, what kind of evidence do you need to prove that it's 200 years later, you have information all of a sudden written about a man that lived 200 years earlier? Would you yourself write anything about somebody who lived 100 years earlier or 50 years earlier without a single eyewitness account and be able to publish it?
No, we're Christians. We go to Jesus Christ. Let's go up and look at the slide I want to put up next, because look at this slide. Here's a comparison. If we as Christians were dependent on who Jesus Christ was, what he did and what he said, and we know that immediately from the writings of Paul were written within 15 years of Christ's death. We know that the tafsir, let's do like with like. The Sirah of Jesus, which would be the biography of Jesus, would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Right? That's correct. That would be his life.
The equivalent to that, exactly.
That's the black letter of the Gospels.
That's correct.
The Hadith, what Jesus said, would be the red letters. In my Bible, we have red and black. What Jesus said is written in red. That would be the Hadith of Jesus.
Correct.
So we know that 3 of those, the Sirah and the Hadith of Jesus, were written within, at the latest, 40 years after Christ's death for Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John would have been written within 60 years of Christ's death. And when you talk about equivalence, if you want to look at tafsir, that would be Paul's letters, would be the tafsir. They were written within 15 years of Christ's death. They begun to.
That's right.
If you want to talk about the tahriq, the history, that would be the book of Acts.
That's correct.
It would be the history of the early church.
And written probably within
between
also
52 and 62 AD by Luke. So there you have the Sirah, the Hadith, the tafsir, and the tahriq of Jesus, all written within 15 to 60 years of Christ's death. Look at the exact same genre for Islam about who Muhammad was, what he said, and about the history of the early Islam. That is 200 to 300 years difference. If we were dependent on who Jesus was, and we had the very same type of material that Islam has about Muhammad and the beginning of Islam, we would know nothing about Jesus until the 3rd century.
Correct.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John would not have existed in the 1st century. We would be dependent on the 3rd century to even know who this man was, what he did. How would we defend him?
And you know, brother, here is what troubles me is that Muslims keep always going back to the fact that the one of the early, the P52 papyri, that it dates like 100 or to 110 AD. They're upset about that, and how can we even prove that any of the accounts are true? Yet it is still within the range versus the 300.
Basically, what we're saying is Islam has a real problem here. Everything we know about who Muhammad was, how Islam began, what happened between him and his wives and his family, where even the name Mecca is nothing that exists in the first century, and we're going to get even better as we move into these episodes. We're going to now move into what the concern is of the historians. But you can see already, we're now doing like with like. And like with like, I'm so glad that we as Christians have authoritative eyewitness account. Matthew and John were actually there. They were with Jesus for the last 3 years. They saw what he did. They heard what he said. They wrote verbatim what they knew about what he said and did. Thank God for the eyewitness accounts. Mark and Luke got it from the eyewitnesses. And that's why we can know exactly who Jesus was, what he said. If you want to talk about if whether we have the originals or not, that's not even in question. Nobody doubts that Jesus existed. Nobody doubts that he died on the cross. We have Thallus, we have Phlegon, we have Tacitus, we have Josephus,
Even
Greek,
non-Christian
Roman,
sources.
all of these non-Christians that support the death of Jesus Christ. We talked about that in an early episode. But when you look at what we have historically versus what Islam has historically, there's no comparison, but it gets much worse. We're going to show you now what we're now finding, because everything we know is from the 9th and 10th century. That's 200 to 300 years later. Wouldn't you like to go back to the 7th century?
Absolutely.
We're going to do that in the next episode. Thanks so much for having me on board, and thanks so much for giving me both of us a platform now to actually ask the historical question. And that's what we want to do. We want to see not what the narratives say from each viewpoint. We want to know what history is actually telling us. And the historians are very suspicious that everything they know about Muhammad and, of course, Islam is 200 to 300 years after the fact. Now, let's put up the screen and let's look and see what their concern is. And these are Western historians who are Islamicists. They are all experts in Islam. This is their concern. Dr. Humphrey says, Islam as we know it did not exist in the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years. He said this way back in 1991, so this is older material. This is not new. What we're introducing right now is not the newest material. So Muslims should not be shocked by what we're going to be saying in the episodes yet to come. Dr. Andrew Rippon, who has just died actually last year, he said this: the Quran probably was not revealed to one man in 22 years, but likely evolved over a period of 50 to 100 years. We do know that Wansborough also supports this. He said this in 1977. Rippon said this in 1985. Toby Lester, who wrote that famous article, was referring to this in 1999. The conclusion is that the history of Islam, at least from the time of the Caliph Abdul Malik, hold that name under your cap. This is an important name. Abdul Malik, who ruled from 685 to 705 and before, is a later fabrication. Dr. Patricia Crone, Dr. Michael Cook, Robinson, these are all the ones who are making and coming to how do they come to this conclusion? And that's what we want to do today. We want to know and see how they came to the conclusion. Well, let's take a look at the next slide. If so much of the Islamist history, and this is their concern, was created so late, like we said in the first episode, why did it take so long to write it all down? Why did it take 200 to 300 years to write this down? If this is the greatest prophet in the history of mankind, if this is the seal of all the prophets, they should have written down right away.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Muslims, whenever I've asked this, they said, well, they were not literate. Now, hold on, stop a minute. They controlled Basra, Baghdad, Damascus, Jerusalem, Cairo by 652. All those 5 great cities of the Levant were under their jurisdiction. By the time Abdul Malik comes to power in 685, they controlled all the way from Spain in the west to India in the east. That whole swath of land was under their control. Are you telling me nobody could read and write between India and Spain?
They had a lot of educated people in there.
Absolutely. And remember, there was a library in Alexandria that was destroyed in the 5th century. This is 200 years before what we're talking about. What do you have in libraries if they're not books? So certainly they could read and write. They were not illiterate. This was, weren't we just talking about the compilation of the Quran at the time of Abu Bakr, the first compilation by Abu Bakr? Zayd bin Thabit does that in 632 to 634. Didn't we also talk about a second compilation by Uthman?
Absolutely.
This is the mid-7th century. Even the traditions tell us that the Quran was written down. So certainly someone had to know how to read and write if they wrote it down.
Absolutely. And Muhammad himself, according to the tradition, had people around him in his immediate circle, close circle, that used to write for him.
Absolutely. Ubay ibn Ka'b, Ibn Masud, Ibn Musa, Zayd ibn Thabit. Who are these guys? They were all writing codices. So this idea of illiteracy maybe work for Muhammad and just for him, but certainly not his companions, and certainly not for the Quran. Now, so where did these 9th century, where did Al-Bukhari, where did Sahih Muslim, where did Ibn Dawud, where did Tirmidhi, where did they get their material from?
Correct.
If they didn't know the man, if they weren't there, hadn't seen him, 200 or 300 years, if they didn't know that, then our question, and this is a good question, historical question, can we therefore trust it if it's 200 to 300 years later?
Yep.
And should we therefore go back to the 7th century? Shouldn't we go back to what actually happened? So let's do that, and let's see what they're finding.
Let's do it.
Now this gets fun, because it's when we go back to that century that we're going to see a lot. Now let's just look at this map here. I'll put it up on the slide there. You can see it. Look at the brown area. That's the area that they controlled by 661. So we're talking roughly 30 years after Muhammad's death. All that brown area, that includes Persia and Arabia. They're starting to move across Libya, over across northern Africa, and they're going to eventually get all the way up to Andalusia. And over the other direction to the east, they're going to eventually get all the way to the Mongol Empire in India. So that's the swath of land that they control within 30 to 40 to 60 years, because we're looking at the first 60 years after Muhammad's death, up to the time of Abdul Malik, who is the great caliph, the great reformer. He's going to be coming into quite a bit, and that's why I keep on mentioning his name as we move into this material. But just so you get the map, so you see what we're looking at. Now, let's look at this slide, because these are the major scholars who I'll be using and I have been using. Dr. John Wansborough, he was head of department at School of Oriental and African Studies there in the University of London in London. He wrote 2 books called Quranic Studies and Sectarian Milieu in 1977 and 1978. That blew open this whole thing of historical criticism, because he was basically saying in those 2 books, everything we see in the Quran does not make sense for the 7th century. This is material that was what they wouldn't have had access to until the 8th century, because these were being written in places like Ctesiphon, which was the archaic name for Baghdad. It doesn't make sense this early. From a literary standpoint, I don't understand how you can have this kind of material that early, because it's all been borrowed. He was very clear. It has been borrowed, and we know who they borrowed from, because this material that they borrowed from, like we said in our earlier episodes, were written down in the 2nd century, in the 5th century, but they were not in the Hijaz, in that part of the world that Muhammad was living, if he did live down there. Haunting, who is my professor when I was at School of Oriental African Studies I was there in 1994. 1995, and I studied under him. He has been the one that just opened up for me. I had never heard this material until I studied under him about all the problems of the 1st century of Islam. Dr. Patricia Krone, this woman from Denmark who studied under Dr. Wansborough and got her doctorate there at SOAS, then went and was head of department at Oxford University when she wrote Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. We're going to talk about her when we get to Mecca. She reads and writes 15 languages.
I know, in different languages, absolutely.
These are archaic languages. These are not modern languages. These are archaic languages. I don't know anyone that has that kind of caliber. She's a linguist. So she went back, and she did what all historians should do. She went back to the original documents. That's why she is so threatening to a lot of Muslims. They absolutely hate her guts. Now, she has just died last year.
That's right.
But I got to know her when she then wrote this book. She then got death threats and then moved to Cambridge University. And she helped me in fact, she was the one that helped me put my debate together in 1995 when I debated Dr. Jamal Badawi on this material. That was in 1995, August of 1995. I did my first debate with Dr. Jamal Badawi, considered to be the world authority on the Quran in the English-speaking world at that time. He came through the Trinity School at Cambridge, and we did this debate, a 2-hour debate, and I gave him 10 historical challenges. 1995 we're talking about. We're now in 2018.
And they remain probably standing.
Those 10 questions he could not answer. They are still up there on the internet today, and we're going to unpack some of them, but we've moved way beyond since 1995. It's much easier today, as you're going to find out as we go through this episode. Dr. Rippin from Oxford University at that time, he's now moved, he's no longer there, but when I knew him, he was at Oxford University. He reads and writes 18 languages. So these are linguists. These are the ones, that's why they're so dangerous, because they're going back to the original documents. Dr. Did I say Rippon? I'm sorry, that wasn't Rippon. That was Hoyland. It was from Oxford. Dr. Andrew Rippon is from Calgary, and he is the one that probably has taken this very difficult academic material and brought it to layman's terminology.
That's
correct.
Why
I recommend
him.
him.
The Quran a lot.
There you go. And he focuses on Islam and how Islam began, and he's got some great material on their beliefs and practices.
Correct.
Now, Hoyland is one I meant to talk about. Is from Oxford. He reads and writes 18 languages.
And he has a wonderful book, by the way, Seeing Islam as Others See It.
And probably the best book that actually shows that the people that were living at that time did not know about this religion.
They were just quotations, but not specific names or anything like that.
There was no reference to a people called Muslims, no reference to a religion called Islam, no reference to a book called the Quran, and no reference to a man named Muhammad, except from external sources. We'll get to that later. Dr. Yehuda Neville, out of University of Jerusalem, did the best work in looking on the earliest inscriptions, showing us that the documentary book just doesn't fit this historical narrative coming out of Islam. And then from the German school, you have Dr. Gunther Luning, you have Dr. Gerhard Puin, you have Dr. von Bothmer, and you have Dr. Oleg. These are the ones that we used a bit in our last episodes, who then unpacked the Quran and looked at the earliest manuscripts.
Could you give our audience just the 1 minute maybe explanation? What do we mean by the revisionist?
Okay. Revising is what it means. A revisionist is someone who looks at a narrative and says, there are some problems here. And they said, we need to see what history is telling us. We need to revise it back to the historical record.
In other words, in this case, revising some of the traditional Islamic dates.
Huge revisionism, and that's why revisionist is a dirty word for Muslims. Muslims hate the name revisionist. Another name they give is Orientalists. They are part. The Orient is now today. You would think of China back in the 1800s and 1900s. The Orient always meant the Middle East. So Orientalism is a study of Islam. Unfortunately, it doesn't make sense in the 21st century because Orient, but that's the traditional name for the academic name for someone who is an expert on the Middle East, the Orientalist.
Correct.
And they hate the name Orientalist because that's a Western scholar who is studying Islam. So these are all Orientalists.
That's correct.
And these names that we have up on that slide there are all from the revisionist school.
Thank you.
Now, there are 3 books that have been popularized, and this is probably, rather than going to their material, I mean, Dr. Patricia Corona, she doesn't translate anything. She keeps it in its original tongue. You and I don't know these languages, so you need someone to unpack that for you.
Correct.
And the person who does that is this man here, Dr. Tom Holland. He is not an Orientalist. He is not an historian. He is a literary critic. In fact, his area of expertise is literature. He's a great writer. He actually explains it. He took 6 years to write that book there. The UK version, the US version, In the Shadow of the Sword. Taking all this material that we're going to introduce, not all of it, but back in 2012, he was able to take it down and put it into one book. If you're going to get a book, read that book first, because that will set the stage of what we're going to be saying. Then he did a documentary called Islam, the Untold Story. Now, this documentary was shown on Channel 4 television in Britain on August 4th. In
August 28th.
August 28th in 2012. They only showed it one time. It's only 90 minutes long. I have it on my computer here. You can't see, I've been told some people have been able to find it outside of the UK, but they do not want it to be broadcast outside the UK. When they wanted to broadcast it a second time in November of that same year, there was such an outcry from the Muslim community that they didn't show it a second time. You need to watch this documentary. It's only 90 minutes long, and it takes what he says in his books and puts it in a visual format, but he's very careful not to come to conclusions. He just said, isn't this interesting? Isn't this interesting? He has a Muslim scholar with him from, I think, from Georgetown University, who just says, yes, that is interesting, but I don't care. It's not important because we have 1.8 billion Muslims that disagree. It's basically his only recourse.
The traditional argument that numbers matter.
We got more people, therefore
right.
Deal with it. So it's a fascinating documentary. It would be great if you could see it, those who are watching it. But I want to go down to this man here, Dan Gibson. Dan Gibson, I've never met him, but I've emailed him. And he did what every researcher should do. He went and he lived in situ. He lived where he did his research. He lived to where the questions were. He lived in Jordan. He lived in Yemen. He lived amongst the Bedouin. And from 1979 to 2004, 1979 to 2004, for 25 years, he went and looked at what the Quran was saying. And then he tried to find the places that are in the Quran, the geographical places.
And that makes sense. I mean, if the Quran is talking about something, let's go and verify it.
And then he went and he looked at the mosques. And if you look at the slide again, that book there, those are the three things he has written. The Quranic Geography, which came out in 2011. The Sacred City is a documentary which you can get online.
Absolutely.
That came out in 2016. And then just last year, in 2017, he came out with Early Islamic Qiblats.
And I have all of those, and you have probably all of them, and wonderful resources for people to go.
Please get them. If you don't have them, you need to do them. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually end with this one slide. I want you to look at this slide here, because I'm going to tell you what they all said before we even start to prove it.
And I want my audience, especially the Muslims, to pay close attention to this.
This is what they found. Now, we're going to have to prove all this, but let's start with what they found. Number one, the first Arab inscription referencing Muhammad is not till 691. Ooh,
In other words, there is nothing so far to prove that that name was mentioned prior to this.
From Arab sources. Now, I'm using the word Arab cautiously
That's
for a
important,
reason.
yeah.
Why? Because we don't have any reference to Muslims until the 690s.
The word Muslims.
The word Muslims. So what did these people, these Arabs, call themselves? Well, they call themselves Saracen, which is the name for the Arabs of that area.
That's right.
They call themselves Hagarines because they were in the
From
line of
Hagar.
Hagar. They call themselves Ishmaelites because the line of Ishmael through Hagar.
Correct.
They call themselves Maghreb because they're from the Maghreb, which is the area they lived in. And they use the word Muhajirun, which means people of the Exodus.
Who exactly? Who moved?
Which people who are moving, like nomadic people.
Exactly.
Those are the names they gave themselves. Hold on a minute. This is going up to 690. Muhammad died in 632. So for 60 years, they never use the name they should have. They use these other names for themselves.
That's correct.
Where is this reference to Muslim?
It's only
then?
common sense.
You would have thought that these are the first Muslims. Why didn't they use it in any documentation we can find today? Let's look at the third category. The first reference to the name Islam is not till 691 introduced on the Dome of the Rock. That's why the Dome of the Rock is so important. We're going to come back to it again because other things were introduced there, as we're going to find later on. Now, the first, and here is the hardest one for Muslims to stomach. The first reference to Mecca is not till 741. Ooh,
And that's on any ancient maps.
Anywhere. This is not even on a map. This is on a document called Apocalypse of Pseudo-Methodius. We're going to talk about it later on when we get to Mecca. But the first reference to Mecca is not till the 8th century. Now, you'll see why that's hugely significant. And then, of course, the first biography, as we talked about earlier, of Muhammad is not introduced until 833. Take a look at those 6 references and see why this is so damaging to Islam.
Absolutely, and I can't find a better place to stop this exciting, basically, new discoveries that at least you, what I appreciate about you is you share what's out there. This isn't your opinion. This isn't not even your research.
No.
You are recording and reporting to people, just the people, the man on the street. Go, take a look at this source, see what's going on in there, and ask yourself these vital questions. Remember, we have 1.6 billion Muslims who are basing their faith on traditional dates.
Absolutely.